My name is Laird Klingler, a librarian with the Cornish Historical Society. We're here at the second floor of the town office to interview Sandy Guest. Billy Scharf will be doing the filming, and the date is July 12th, 2018. Sandy, thank you for coming. Okay.
Thank you for asking.
All right. You know, before we begin the interview, on behalf of the Neighbor to Neighbor group, I wanted to thank you for the refreshments that you have provided for our firewood projects, you know, at the...
That was quite a long time ago. I haven't done that.
Well, we haven't had to cut too much lately, you know,
Uh-huh.
but thank you very much. Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, maybe we start by asking, you know, where and when you were born.
I was born in Claremont Hospital in March of 1947.
And after you left the hospital, did you come back here?
Yes, to Cornish, to Parsonage Road, where I live today.
So actually, you were born here, and then spent a good portion of your life, you know, in Cornish.
Yes,
Okay.
and of course, coming back to see my mother during the times when I was out and about in the world.
Oh, okay. Now, for your early years, you mentioned that you went to one of the one-room schoolhouses.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So I was listening to Judy Rook reminisce about that this morning, and she spent longer in the one-room schoolhouse. I was only in 1 year, and I went to the one at the flat that's now the Masonic Hall. And my best friend Nancy Hayward, who lived in the house on the corner of Jackson and Parsonage Road, and I went there by bus, and we loved it. Because we were good little girls. Now that we're much older, we've heard that the teachers were not as kind to the little boys and were much harsher on them than they were on us. And so their memories tend to be quite different.
So how, I'm curious, your home is on Parsonage Road.
Yes.
Up near Jackson Road, would that be about right?
No, it's further up the road. I said Nancy Hayward's house was on the corner of Jackson and Parsonage, and mine is a quarter of a mile up the hill.
You know, I'm just curious that you went to the school in the flat. Did you have a choice? I mean, weren't there other schools that were closer?
I don't know. Yes, right at the end of Jackson Road on 120 was one of the one-room schoolhouses, and for some reason we didn't go there. We were bused out to the flat.
To the flat.
Yep. And then once our first grade year was over, by the time second grade started, we were in the new school.
The new school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit more about a one-room schoolhouse, you know, and your experiences there.
I have what I always consider a terrible memory of one time. There was an infestation of army worms, of webworms, and the teacher sent us out onto the playground with those little cone-shaped white cups, they're tiny ones, and our little blunted scissors. And we were to catch the caterpillar in there and cut them in half so that they'd stay inside. Oh, I just thought that was horrible. And so I would catch them, but I couldn't cut them in half. And so I kept trying to herd them back into the paper cone. And then finally I must have gotten a friend to cut them in half for me, or the exercise was over with, but it's just a horrible memory.
Now, was there running water there at all?
I don't remember that. I do remember that there was an outhouse.
An outhouse that you used, yeah. So what about, do you remember much about the flat at that time?
No, we just went to school on the bus. I don't have very, and that being a happy time.
Yeah. Of course, you were quite young. I mean, you're looking back.
Yes. I do remember sitting on Nancy Hayward's front lawn, and we decided that we would sort out all of the letters that weren't in the alphabet. And so they were sitting going A, B, C.
Sure.
You know, there aren't any letters that aren't in the alphabet. And the other thing is, I remember the day I learned to read.
You do?
I do.
Do you remember your first book?
No.
No, Nancy Hayward was a friend of yours.
Yes.
Yes. Did she live in Cornish a long time? I don't know.
She did, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, is she alive? Or is she...
Yes, she is. She and her husband live up in Littleton, New Hampshire.
Oh.
And she has such a wonderful memory. I'm wondering if we can import her down here for something like this. She just remembers wonderful things.
And then you went to the consolidated school.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, was that crowded? I mean, was that? Do you remember that? No.
Didn't think it particularly crowded. We had full classes.
Full
They
classes,
were 30 in a classroom. We didn't think anything of that.
Later on, the gym was added to that.
Yes.
Yes.
We just had the two wings with the cafeteria where it is now at the corner.
Do you remember, was it a big change for you to go to a consolidated school or as opposed to having all the grades together?
I don't remember it feeling like much of a change. I was with my friends and moving along as things are supposed to do, I assumed, not
Now,
knowing any better.
Sure. Now, you lived on Parsonage Road with your parents.
Mm-hmm.
You had a brother too,
I
right?
have an older brother,
Older
yes.
brother, yes.
Yeah.
Now, how did your parents come to Cornish?
They were from Arlington, Massachusetts, and I don't know how they got here. Well, I mean, why Cornish in particular, but they came in 1935 and bought that house. And in those days...
Is it an old home? I don't
Yes,
know.
it's probably built 1870 to 1880. And it cost $1,200 with a good bit of land at that time.
Was it a farm or no?
Yeah.
It was a farm. Did your father do any farming?
No. My at that time, you didn't want to farm if you had other things to do. And my mother was a secretary, and my father worked for the unemployment agency in Claremont.
Your mother worked for Claremont Paper?
Yes.
Yes. Now, your father was a veteran of World War I.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever interviewed someone whose parents were in World War I. Tell us what your father told you about World War I.
My father was such a wonderful storyteller, and I remember sitting at the dinner table and him telling wonderful stories. I don't remember them, neither can I tell stories the way he did. At one time I remember saying, "But Daddy, didn't anything bad ever happen to you?" Because these were just wonderful, amusing stories about the war. And he said, "Yes, but we don't talk about that."
Yes.
Yeah.
And tell us about the end of the war.
He was in the front lines in France when the armistice was declared. And remember, we never crossed the border into Germany in World War I. The armistice was signed without them being invaded, which was one of the reasons for World War II. When time had gone by, they got to thinking that, well, no one really invaded us. How bad could it be? Let's start another war.
Yeah. Well, he must have experienced trench warfare then.
Yes.
In World
Yeah.
War I.
He was with the Signal Corps, and I still have one of his signal flags that he brought home.
Oh, really?
Yes. And he talks about running wire to hook up telephones and that sort of thing. And he had the signal flag, and I don't know how they managed it. A lot of stories about finding a group of men that had a good cook. The signalmen were good at that.
That's interesting because in World War II, my father was in the Signal Corps in Europe.
Was he, for
Yes,
heaven's sake?
Later time.
Yeah, but whereabouts was he?
Well, he was pretty close to the front. He followed Patton across Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And then he met his brother just before the Battle of the Bulge,
Oh, my heavens.
So.
Now, what do you mean he met his... I'm sorry, I have to ask. I'm so interested in World War II. Met his brother?
Well, I really shouldn't tell the story because it's about you, but I will tell it. It's a good story. My father was in the Signal Corps,
Yeah.
and his younger brother was in the infantry in the front lines. And so my father was an officer. He got a Jeep, and he went up to the front lines, and he spoke to his brother's commanding officer and said, "Could Bill get away for a little?"
Yeah.
So the two brothers found a little town, found a bistro.
Oh,
So what do two brothers do
Yes.
in World War II? They probably drank too much cognac.
yes, indeed. whatever they had.
But they were going back, then there was back lines, and the Germans started,
Oh my
with the
goodness.
incoming.
So they just kind of got out of there in time.
They drove up. My uncle told, my father would never talk about the war. My uncle said, we were driving, your father was driving, but the bombs were going off on either side of the road. It was a very frightening experience. But I got back, my uncle was wounded at the Battle of Bulge. My father was, back to the Signal Corps. So we have something in common there in
Yes,
terms
indeed.
of the, I'm sorry to go on, it's supposed to be about you.
No,
you
no,
know,
I love
yeah.
that story.
Yeah. Now, also, it's listed in Rawson's book that your mother was an Episcopalian. So would you have gone then to Trinity Church?
Yes. For years we went to Trinity Church until it kind of closed down, and then we went to Trinity in Claremont. I was married at Trinity Church in Cornish.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, it was opened for that. It would be open for special occasions, not just for me, but...
Yeah. So, but when you went there, was it an active... I believe that they shared an Episcopal priest with Windsor.
Yes, Father Bragg.
Oh, you
And he'd
remember?
go back, yes,
Yeah.
he'd go back and forth between the
Do
two
you remember
churches.
when the church was active then? Or, when you... Was there Sunday school or things like that you went to? Or?
When we went to Claremont, they had Sunday school, but Cornish didn't have Sunday school at that time.
Did you know Helen Lovell? I know she was very active in that
No,
Trinity Church.
no, don't have any, I know she was,
Yeah.
but I don't have any particular memory of
And
it.
then you went into Claremont.
Right.
Was Claremont pretty much the town then? When you went to
Yes.
town, it was...
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember, and other people don't remember this, but you'd go into town, into Claremont, or I don't know, maybe Windsor. We never went there. On Friday nights to shop. And that's when you did all your errands on Friday nights. Well, that was payday as well, so I assume that's why Friday nights. And nowadays we just shop all 7 days of the week, and there's nothing closed on Sunday. And
So you remember Claremont past and present. I mean, you know what it's like now,
Yeah.
downtown.
it's not as busy
No.
as it was. There used to be two theaters, the Magnet and the Latches. And now we have no, well, they're out on Washington Street, aren't they? But this was right in town.
Did you go to the movies then, Claremont?
Not very often, no. That was kind of frivolous. My mother was not frivolous.
Oh, no? No. I always like to ask people if they remember the first movie they ever saw. Can you remember a movie from when you went to Claremont? To the theaters there?
No.
Yeah.
Was there a movie called Barney O'Gill and the Little People? Something like that. I think it might have been Disney.
Oh, really? Really? Yeah.
And I couldn't go because it was my brother's wedding. And I was always very resentful of that. And it was years before I ever saw that movie on
Yeah.
probably videotape.
Well, tell us about a Friday night in Claremont.
Oh, well, there was grocery shopping and then all kinds of errands. There was the big, I can't remember the name now. It was 4 stories, shopping store, Pleasant Street, right on the corner. Oh, I should remember the name, I don't. Right where the little square is, what is it called? Tremont Square.
Right.
So it was right in the corner. You'd always go in there and see if you needed socks or... Oh, we looked at the patterns a lot. My mother sewed my clothes for me. And so we liked to look at the patterns there and then go find some fabric.
Busy. It was busy, but what I've been
Oh,
told.
yeah, very busy. Oh, and 2 5 and dimes. The Newberries and Woolworths, one on either side of the street.
It must be different for you now to go into Claremont with those memories, of how crowded things used to be. And,
Yeah, and I rarely go into downtown Claremont. Of course, I go out on Washington Street and go to the big grocery stores out there and that sort of thing.
Did you, from talking to other people on this side of town tended to go to Claremont. People on the other side tended to go more to Windsor.
Yeah.
Did you ever go to Windsor? Or did you?
I don't remember going there.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. It was Claremont, that's where.
Yeah, that would be the focus.
So then you would have gone then to Claremont High School?
I've been accepted at St. Mary's in the Mountains Prep School, But for my sophomore year, and so for my freshman year, I went to Stevens. And then when that was over, I went to, it's called the White Mountain School now in Littleton, New Hampshire, but at the time it was an all-girls Episcopal boarding school.
Oh.
And now it's I assume it's still Episcopal, but it's co-ed at this time.
And what was it called again?
St. Mary's in the Mountains.
St. Mary's in the Mountains.
Yes.
Up in Littleton?
Yeah. It's called the White Mountain School now.
It was an Episcopal school?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yep. Required prayers twice a day, required church on Sunday.
Would you say that you came from a religious family then?
Yeah. Yes. Required.
Okay, well let's pick up your life then after you graduated from the school, the Episcopal school.
Oh, I went to college in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a small women's liberal arts college there called Chatham.
Chatham?
Yep. And because it was a women's school, we kind of had to have a men's school as a partner, and that was in Washington, Pennsylvania. And we would go down from time to time for fraternity parties or whatever. And that's where I met my future husband. And he was from Pittsburgh as well.
What was the name of the men's school?
Washington and Jefferson.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
really? Okay.
It's a small
Yes, yeah.
liberal arts college. Yeah.
It was that way for me. I went to Lafayette,
Oh, did you?
Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And there were Cedar Crest and Centenary. There were the girls' schools. At that time, when I was all male.
Yeah.
So very
Yeah.
similar,
Yeah.
very similar experience. Yeah.
They had single gender schools, and it wasn't till a bit after that they started integrating.
Yeah. What did you major in?
History.
History.
Loved history.
Yeah.
And at the time, 25 cents would get me a cup of coffee. We didn't talk about what are you going to do with your education back in those days. We just assumed that education itself would be enough. And I think that oftentimes it is. But it doesn't hurt to think about what you might be using it for in the future.
Yes. Then after you graduated, what came next?
By then, Pete was my fiance, and he had gone over to Bologna, Italy, for his first year of medical school at the University of Bologna. He came back at the end of his first year, and we got married, and I went back with him that fall.
To Italy?
To Bologna, yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yep, I was there. It's a 6-year program over there, not 4 years, and so I was there 5 years with him. And we came back twice to the United States during those 5 years.
What was your program when you say you? What were you studying?
Housewifery.
I said you meant his program. I'm sorry.
Yes, his program.
Yeah,
We came back twice, and we have 2 children. I felt very fortunate that I was able to have my children here in the United States.
Born in something.
Yeah. I said I would be brave and I could have them in Italy, but I was ever so kind of glad that I was able to come back. We pamper women more than they did in Italy at the time.
Oh, really?
There was no drugs at all. Childbirth was seen as a natural thing, just get on with it, lady, and try not to make too much of a fuss. And so I was glad to come over here where we have a little more pampering.
Did you learn to speak Italian?
I'm not very good with languages. My husband was fluent.
Oh, was he?
Of course, because he was taking classes.
Classes,
Yeah. But I did everything. Went out shopping. You don't need a lot of English, particularly in a foreign country. You just need to get accustomed to how you get on a bus and go somewhere and where.
Bologna is a good-sized town, right?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And
Did you go to Italian opera?
we went once, just to say we had done that, yeah. But you get to know where the small farmers market is, and where the little store that sells your milk and eggs. They'd have different stores. You go here for milk and eggs, and here for bread, and a different store for meat. So you'd make your rounds in the morning. Oh, and they had tiny little refrigerators, so you went shopping every day. And you only got a few eggs. You wouldn't have a dozen eggs. There'd be no room for them in the refrigerator. So you just get a
So
few.
every day you would shop? Yeah.
Every day, yeah.
Okay, now we're resuming now. So while you were in Italy then, you took quite a trip, I understand.
Oh, yes.
Tell us about your trip.
Yes, well, before the babies came, that first summer we were in Italy. We took a 3,000-mile trip on a 175cc Moto Guzzi motorcycle. And that was with two of us and our tent and things packed on the back. It could do 35 miles an hour with a tailwind going downhill.
Must have gotten good gas though, mileage, huh?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So would you camp out then during the trip?
Yes, we camped the entire time. It was funny when we were out on the open roadway. Sometimes there would be the more normal cyclists, the ones with the leathers and the large bikes and everything. And they'd solemnly go like this, and we'd go because we weren't we weren't big enough and important enough to be flashing any kind of motorcycle sign.
How long were you gone then?
30 days.
30 days.
Yeah.
And
We went up.
You went to England too?
Yeah, we went up through the north of Italy, crossed under the Alps into France, up along the edge of France, and crossed the English Channel into England. The only problem is a Moto Guzzi is a metric bike, and once we crossed the channel, we were in a non-metric system. But my husband had packed some tools in our backpacks, what do you call them, bags. Mm-hmm. And the clutch was slipping, but he could tighten up the clutch every time, and we got it to go. And we went, spent some time in London, crossed over England into Wales, crossed into Ireland. Remember, we landed in Dublin and drove into Dublin just in time to see the Dublin Horse Show. And so we went on in to see, and we got to see some of that huge stadium jumping that they do when they look like they come from a standstill. They're not really, but they go up over the high jumps. We saw the American team jump and the German team jump, and then we went back across, and we wanted to see more of Scotland, but by then the clutch was slipping so badly that we said we can't. We couldn't force the motorcycle up those hills, and so we turned around in Edinburgh and headed for home. Came straight down, crossed back over.
Well, that's something you'll always remember.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, now when he finished his program then, and then came back, and what type of physician was he?
He's a emergency room physician. He likes that best. A generalist. GP in an emergency.
So, and then he was in Pittsburgh.
Yes, and he finished his residency and his marriage at the same time. It was kind of stereotypical, but he was interested in moving on, so I came back up here to home. And while I was down there, I got my master's degree in library science.
Oh, from the University of Pittsburgh?
Yes.
Oh.
And so I sent out all my resumes for jobs in New England, and at the time there weren't a lot of jobs for librarians. And so the librarian in Claremont said, well, come on in and volunteer. She said, if you're just working in a library, sometimes it's easier to get a job. And so I'm sending out the resumes everywhere. And one day I got a phone call while I was working at the library. And this man on the other end said, interview, and I said yes, because that's what you said, if you even heard the word interview at that time. And it turned out that he was the principal of Ashland High School in Ashland, Maine, way up in the county. I didn't know Maine got that far away, 8 hours from Cornish. But I drove up and I just fell in love with the place and the people. They offered me the job that day. I said yes, and I came back down home. My kids were due back from their visit with their dad, and I picked them up at the airport and we headed to northern Maine. So, and that began my career as a school librarian.
The school librarian.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Now, just for clarification, you had been divorced at that time.
Yes.
But the children were with you.
Most of the time,
Most
through
of
the
the
school
time.
year, they spent summers with their dad in Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
How long then did you serve in Maine in the school?
Just 2 years, because that same school principal who had called me had interviewed down in Newport for the superintendent's job, and when he arrived back in northern Maine, he said, "By the way, Sandy, there's a school librarian opening in Sunapee. I think you ought to apply for it. It's closer to your mom and closer to home." So I came down, and at the time, librarians with a degree were rare in small schools. In this part of New England, possibly not in Connecticut and further south. But so I remember walking in and saying that I was there to talk to them about the job, and the secretary put her hand on the phone and she said, "Do you have your MLS degree?" And I said, "Yes," and she picked up the phone and I was in talking to the superintendent within minutes.
Well, even today, many of the librarians, small town librarians, just are certified. You know, they haven't been to library school, you know, but good for you. That was good. You know.
Well, it just seems like my life has had so much luck in it. I've had
So
a
then,
good life.
did you live at home then with your mother, or? Yeah.
No, we moved to Sunapee.
Oh, you moved to Sunapee?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. 26 miles away.
Did your children again go to the Sunapee
Yes.
schools then?
Yeah, they both graduated from the Sunapee school system. My son started as a 3rd grader and my daughter as a 4th grader there. It's a good school system over there.
Do they presently live around you? Or?
No. My son is out in Fort Collins, Colorado,
Oh.
and he just loves it out there near the mountains.
Yes.
And my daughter's in Amesbury, Mass. And she does have 2 children, so I have 2 grandchildren.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, and they're both college students.
Well, then, at some point, then you went back to live with your mother. Is that?
No.
No, you didn't. No.
No. No, my daughter and her family moved in with her at a time when she needed care.
Your daughter and her family.
Right.
I see.
And helped take care of my mom, and then my mom had to go into care. And then a couple of years later, she died. And it wasn't until some years after that, well, when I retired, my daughter moved out and I moved in.
So then you had retired from Sunapee. Did you live at Sunapee?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I was there 27 years.
27 years.
Yes.
It's a lovely community.
It is.
I've taken the boat ride around it.
Oh, yes.
It's very nice. And I've been to the Fells. You know, it's a lovely community. Yeah. So then when you moved back here, at that point you were retired?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it felt like home.
Yes. Yeah.
It did.
As you said, though, you had a number of travels, around.
Yes. That's what I call it, being out and about in the world.
No, you've seen much more of the world than many of the people that, many of us are here. I like that I know that I mentioned before about neighbor to neighbor. Tell us a little bit about what things that you've done here in Cornish.
I haven't done a lot in Cornish. I mean, I'm active, but my mother was very active and very civic in doing a lot of things. She belonged to quite a few different organizations and trustee of trust funds for the town of Cornish and that sort of thing. She was also a National Park Ranger at St. Gaudens for years and years and years.
Oh, really?
And then my daughter got to do that as well for a couple of years. And there was one year that my mother was one of President George Bush's 1,000 points of light. I don't know if you remember that program.
Yes.
She was named one of those. And the Park Service sent her to Washington, D.C. to receive her award. And they sent my daughter with her. So the two of them went. They were only gone for, I think, 3 days, not very long. But my daughter got to go with her. And I don't know if you know this, but when Park Service is out and about in the world, they wear their uniforms. So there they are in Washington, D.C., kitted out in Park Service uniforms, and lots of tourists asking them questions. And they're we're not from around here. We don't know.
Do you have any photographs of that visit?
I do,
Do
yeah.
you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have so the honor? You have that.
I do.
Good for you. Well, and your mother was active also in the church too, the Trinity Church.
Yes.
And then probably in West Claremont. I mean, in Claremont too. Or?
Yes, very active.
Yeah.
Also, Cancer Society, Oddfellows. What's the women's part of Oddfellows? I can't remember. She was active in that all her life. Rebecca's.
Rebecca.
Mm-hmm. And that's from a time when those organizations were very popular, and they've fallen out of favor in these days.
I read that your father was very active in World War I Veterans Organization. Yes.
Yes, and the Lions Club.
Lions Club.
He loved that.
Yeah.
And he and my mom made many trips to Lions International, and I got to go with them. So I remember trips down to Florida and trips out to California. And, yeah. They drove in the front seat, I held down the back seat. Pass snacks forward.
So then, how long now have you been back in Cornish?
8 or 9 years, I
8 or
think,
9
since
years.
I've retired.
Oh. So it's fairly recent then? It's not-
Yes. Yeah.
And you live in the home where you grew up then?
Yes.
It's remarkable, yeah. One thing I like to ask people in terms of Cornish past and present, and when people generally think of the changes in Cornish, they think roads, and then they think the decline of school enrollment. Now talk about, what's your memory of the roads, for example, in Cornish?
I don't see anything different in the roads at all. I live on a dirt road. I grew up on a dirt road. That's all the same, and there's still many, many dirt roads here. One thing that, coming back to Cornish, that I noticed is this wonderful sense of community that Cornish has. And I think they actively work for it as well. And part of it is the Connect Cornish, that we have this listserv that connects.
That Colleen O'Neill does.
Yes,
Yes.
Connects not only Cornish, but Plainfield and Meriden and other places. That's not the only thing, but when I saw the 250th anniversary come together, I just thought that was amazing, how that was organized and done. Very proud of Cornish.
Yeah. Now, some people have said that there is a difference, that there were fewer activities in town now. So many people to a family home, husband and wife have to work. They have less time. The development of television, for example, has changed. The activities. There used to be more social activities, in town. But you don't seem to.
There used to be square dancing at the town hall.
Okay.
Every Friday night, I think it was. And I got to go as a grade schooler.
Oh.
And the way you do when you're a grade schooler, you just kind of ask if anyone else is going, and then you just kind of show up at the same time. But I have a fun memory of Steve, Uncle Frank. Okay, Frank Ackerman. Sorry, I just couldn't remember the name for a moment there. Frank Ackerman is older, and he kindly asked me to dance a couple of times. And I thought that was, I knew it was out of kindness. Because I was a 5th grader or 6th grader. Not his usual style, but I always thought he had a kind heart for that.
Got you on the dance floor.
Yep.
Yeah. But what about, now some people, what about the wintertime with roads and the snow?
Back when I was young, they never plowed over Parsonage Road, over the hill. There was just snowbanks there and just snow. Nobody lived on that road in between. So it would come up from the brick house there, Parsonage Road, to the White House and stop. And it would come up as far as our house and stop. And that whole hill in between was not plowed during the wintertime. And then gradually, the Bladens built a house there.
So just go over that again. In other words, the top of Parsonage Road, that was blocked off, in other words.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they would just plow up on either side.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Many people do feel that the roads have significantly increased in terms of care, but you're indicating that you really didn't have any problems then, and you're getting around.
No.
Now the other issue is the declining school.
My mother wouldn't allow there to be any problems getting around.
Well, expand on that a little.
Well, I think back in those days, she'd get up in the middle of the night, start the car to make sure it would start first thing in the morning, and she could get to work. And I even did that early on. Nowadays, I think cars are are better than that. You don't need to start them at midnight or 1 in the morning or 2 in the morning.
Your mother was a very direct person, I gather.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably a very efficient person, I imagine.
Yep.
Yes.
More energy than I've ever seen in anyone before. I met one other person and I said, "Are you sure you're not? You weren't born of my mother and she gave you away when you were." But I didn't inherit her endless energy and she could work. That woman could work.
When did your father die? I mean, did she live as a widower for a long period of time?
Oh yes, yeah. She hadn't quite retired yet when he died.
By the time he died.
Yeah, there was 15 years difference in their ages. Yeah.
And of course, she was working. I mean, so she had, there was income.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now the other issue that people bring up is the declining school enrollment. Now
Yes.
you were here when the school was filled, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Completely filled.
Yeah.
Every classroom.
Yeah.
And I think there were probably 30. We've seen our graduation picture from 8th grade. And there's about 30 in there, isn't there? Yeah.
Any thoughts on the decline in school enrollment?
No. Because I worked in education all my life over in Sunapee, I really felt I knew about funding schools. And it was okay to spend money on schools. That's a good use of money for the future of our country and for our children. But we didn't have declining school enrollment over in Sunapee the way we do now in these last few years. And the classes are so small and the budget doesn't seem to be coming down. And so I find myself not feeling quite as confident in my opinion of how much you spend on schools now. And I don't have any answer, even having worked in education all my life.
Some people have suggested that perhaps in the future there might be a merger of the Plainfield and Cornish school systems, dealing with declining enrollment. What do you think about that?
I have heard that. I do attend every school district meeting and every town meeting, yeah, and listen, and vote best I can. But our country was built on everybody has their own school. And what do we go to Plainfield, where they have a nice new school? Does Plainfield come here, which we have an okay school? It's, been kept up and built on and added to. And then how do we feel about that? You know, we no longer have a school. I think it would be very difficult, and I have no good answers. Probably a merger is the most sensible thing at this time, but I think it would be very difficult. In our hearts, maybe not in our minds, I guess is what I mean.
Yes, yeah. Well, some people do feel that the school is a focal point of the community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and, I ask these questions. I'm not here to advocate, anything, but this has come up. And,
Yes.
yeah. It's also come up too. People have raised the issue: are our land use policies encouraging young families, to move in?
You mentioned that before, and we have someone coming in has to buy 5 acres at least. Is that
Certain parts of town, for example, are zoned for 5 acre zoning. Some people have suggested that, for example, in the flat, you don't have 5 acre zoning, to expand, the area in the flat where you wouldn't have to have 5 acres. Just as a way of encouraging young people to move in.
and to keep it a community.
Yes, yeah. Or some people have suggested some clustered housing in certain parts of the town.
Co-housing, right?
Clustered housing.
No, I know, but I was wondering because I've been very interested in the concept of co-housing, and that's clustered housing.
Yes. Yeah. So there are different thoughts on that. Well, I've learned a lot about you from this interview. You really have had a very rich, very full life.
I've been very fortunate.
Yes.
Yes.
And, you're good friends with Shirley Bladen, aren't you? I mean, you live close.
Yes.
Yes.
She's my next door neighbor.
Yeah. So you do things together in the town. Sure.
No, we meet at activities. We don't actually do them together. I get together with Mary Otten. She's a friend of mine since high school.
I know Mary Otten.
Yeah.
Oh, Mary, you and Mary in the same class?
No, she went away we both went away to school.
Right.
But they moved to Cornish when I was a teenager. And so we've been friends ever since.
So you and Mary Otten? Yes, I know Mary Otten.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
We exchange books.
Do you have the number of pets that she has?
She's just down to 2 pets now.
Oh, okay.
So with 6 chickens, I've got her beat.
Oh, you have chickens?
I have 6 chickens and 2 cats.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've covered everything that I would like. Is there anything else that you would like to add that we didn't cover, do you think? Or?
I've loved coming back to Cornish and picking up friendships from when I was young. I'm not going to say this on camera, sorry. But Jerry and Karen Eastman.
So tell us some of the people.
Well, still very connected to Nancy Hayward up in Littleton, and she and her husband have come down. We've gone up to visit. Jerry Eastman, who's in Cornish, was in our class. Mike Yatsevich was in our class.
Oh.
A very dear friend, and we get together from time to time, and we're social together. And it's kind of fun to hear. They even have better memories than I do. Except they were guys, Jerry and Mike and Steve. And their memories of the young, being young in the school system, with getting rapped on the knuckles with the ruler, are not as fond as my memories are. So it's kind of fun to hear the other side of it.
Daisy Yatsevich recommended you.
Yes.
And she did say that she thought you and her brother Michael were in the same class.
We were, yes.
Yeah. Were they also through Stevens, or would it have been?
Jerry continued at Stevens because he was closest to Claremont. Oh, at that time, the 8th grade would break up. If you lived closest to Windsor, you'd go to Windsor.
Oh, so Michael probably went to Windsor.
No, he went to prep school.
Oh, prep school.
Yeah.
I see.
It seems like a lot of us. I went off to prep school, and Steve went off to prep school.
Right. But I remember Daisy did mention Michael.
Mm-hmm.
And you must have known Daisy then too.
Yes.
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 Okay. Well, last chance. Anything else that you'd like to add, or We're happy to have. I'm glad that you're here in town. You're always such a smiling face, a warm, welcoming face. You know, so.
Oh, good, good. I'm just so pleased to be here, back here in Cornish, and I'm so proud of what Cornish has become over the years. And as I said, such a sense of community, strong community, and in many ways. And I gave only one example of Connect Cornish, but the library. So glad to have our store back.
Yes.
Yeah, so that there's a Cornish community store. And there are activities here too. Strong Historical Society.
Yes, thank you. Okay, well, thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
And we always say at the end of every interview, okay, Billy, that's a take.